Hello, everyone, and welcome to the episode of Faerie, Fable, Librarians. I'm Simona.
I'm Katie.
And today we're going to be talking about The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea by Axie Oh. And this is a YA book, and if you ever stop by the library, pick it up. And it's a retelling of a classic Korean folktale, the tale of Shim Chung. And what that is, it's the story of a young woman named Shim Chung who willingly throws herself into the sea in order to save the life of her father. And this tale was very popular at the time that it was written and composed, so it was the Joseon era in Korea. And it was performed usually via music. And it was eventually written down, and it still is a very popular folk tale to this day. So in the tale, Shim Chung, there's a nobleman who has fallen on very hard times, and he also is blind. And he has a daughter named Shim Chung who is very filial and very kind, which was very important at the time that this tale was written, and to an extent still is important in Korea. And she makes the decision to sacrifice herself in the hope that the Dragon King will take pity on her father and restore his eyesight. The Dragon King is so deeply moved by Shim Chung's filial piety that he restores her to the land of the living, and he makes her an empress. And when she becomes an empress, she decides to throw this feast for every blind person within the kingdom. Her father happens to go to that feast, and Shim Chung recognizes his voice, and they're finally reunited, and they live happily ever after.
And there was much rejoicing. Yay!
Yes. So what Axie Oh did when she wrote her story was she wanted to give it a more feminist retelling and sort of not do away with the filial piety aspect, because in many ways the main character, I still think she's very filial because she does do it for her loved ones.
Yeah, she sacrifices herself to the sea god to save her brother.
Yes.
So I don't know how filial, is that what you said?
Yes.
That is, since she's not sacrificing herself for her father. That's more of like...
So maybe I'll do away with the term filial, and we'll just call it, she loves her family very deeply. Mm-hmm. And in the beginning of the story, so essentially what is going on is the land has been ravaged by these devastating floods and storms. In addition, there's also wars going on. There's raids being committed. Yeah, I lost that train of. There's raids. There's a lot of devastation going on, and for the most part, it's the poor and the villages that are suffering as a result of all of this that's happening. So every year or so, the village elders select a beautiful young woman to be sacrificed to the sea god, in the hopes that that sacrifice will quell the sea god's rage and the storms will end.
Yes, but they're not called sacrifices, they're called brides.
They're called brides, but they are essentially sacrifices. Well,
yeah.
They're brides/sacrifices to the sea god. And at the beginning of this story, there is a young woman named Shim Chung who is very beautiful, and she has been chosen to be the sea god's bride. The main character, Mina, she realizes that her brother is in love with Shim Chung, and rather than have Shim Chung sacrifice herself, Mina decides that she will take Shim Chung's place, and she defies the rules, defies the regulations, and she jumps into the sea.
And she cuts her palm first, holds it up to the dragon who's there to take Shim Chung away, and it's that show of, I guess, commitment. It's like she's not wishy-washy. Mm-hmm. She's seriously committed to protecting her brother, who's on the boat with the council. Like, it's like the council. No, it's not even like the advisors of the village, but they're on the boat.
They're essentially men who are there to prevent the chosen bride from saying, to heck with all this.
Yeah.
And they're there to make sure no one tries to rescue her, and they're there to make sure that, which ultimately she's in the middle of the sea. I don't really know what the bride would do anyway.
Yeah.
But that's why they're there.
But so when the dragon sees her blood and, this show of commitment to taking Shim Chung's place, it's then that she then jumps into the sea and is, instead of drowned, is brought to the spirit world.
Yeah, which I guess it's interesting because no one really knows what becomes of the sea brides. The assumption is, I gotta stop saying I apologize. The assumption is that each and every sea bride goes to the underworld, becomes the empress, maybe lives a really good life, and is reincarnated in some way. No one really knows. So Mina enters the spirit realm, and what she realizes early on is that the spirit realm, nothing is quite right even there.
Right.
There are some glaring issues with what is going on in the spirit realm. And she sort of meets these, well, let me just backtrack a bit. So she is able to find the sea god because she and the sea god are connected via this red thread. And
the red string of fate?
Yes. So the red string of fate originates in China, and it's the idea that there is this god who connects soulmates to one another.
Yeah.
And when you are connected by this red thread, you are destined to be together.
Right.
I'm not sure.
Japan has the same tradition.
Yeah, Korea also has it. I know in Thailand there's the tradition of the red thread of fate, or the red string. This is also featured in a lot of dramas.
Mm-hmm.
If you haven't yet seen the episode by the Caffeinated Librarians where we discuss the K-drama Tomorrow, the red string of fate plays a major role in that drama as well. And it's also in the opening credits. So this red string of fate, which in the mortal realm would never be visible to the two people that it connects.
Right.
Since she's in the spirit realm, Mina, who's the central character, she can see that red string of fate, and it leads her to the sea god. So she goes to his palace, and she observes. One thing about Mina is that she's very observant.
Mm-hmm.
And she realizes that the sea god is not well.
Right.
He's this very young, or he appears to be a very young man. He's seated on his throne, and he's almost just there.
He's asleep, is what he is essentially,
Yeah.
and is having like these fitful dreams, but he's not woken up by the dreams.
Yeah, and Mina meets these three lords, and they're not exactly friendly to her.
No.
And Lord Shim essentially severs the red string of fate.
Mm-hmm. It takes her soul.
And he takes her soul and turns it into a
sparrow.
Sparrow. I was going to say magpie.
No, you're right. It is a magpie.
It is a magpie.
Why did I say sparrow?
I'm not sure. But I think I wrote that in my notes. So I apologize. I'm trying to read my notes. It's not a thick book, but still there's a lot that goes on in this book.
There's a lot, yeah.
So he severs the red string of fate. He steals her soul, which is this. Her soul is equated with her voice. So when he steals her soul, he also steals her ability to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So she essentially has to wander the spirit realm, unable to speak. Thankfully, she meets these three spirits.
Which I think they're so cute.
They are. They're very adorable. They all have these traditional masks that they're wearing, so she can't see their face.
Yeah.
But they're very eager to help her, and it's through their aid that she's able to navigate the spirit realm and also understand that all, as I mentioned before, is not well within the spirit realm.
Right.
Something is terribly wrong with the sea god. He isn't doing what he is supposed to do. So there are these powerful houses which are vying for power. They're jostling for power.
Tiger, crane, and dragon? No, lotus.
Lotus, yes. And each of the houses represent a particular discipline. I think Lotus is wisdom. I can't really recall what the other two are.
Now I thought Tiger was like warrior, Crane was knowledge, scholar,
yes.
And I don't recall what Lotus is, what they're responsible for.
I want to say music, but now I'm not sure. But I think and for any of our viewers, if I am wrong, please correct me. When I have watched K-dramas, I thought, because going back to the crane, I thought that traditionally scholars had a crane embroidered on their robes. So I kind of assumed that also the symbolism for the houses also reflects Korean symbolism and mythology. But if I'm wrong, let me know.
from what I read, I recall that being the case just because of how because when they're at the banquet in Lotus House, it's like the Tiger Lord of Tiger House and his retainers that go with him, they're all like warrior built, and then the Crane Lord and his retainers, they're more like scholarly. I mean, that's what I recall reading, but it's been a little bit, so
Yeah, but like I said, if we're wrong and anyone knows, let us know.
Please.
And another thing also with regards to the dragon in Korean, and it may also be in other cultures as well, the emperor's robes were always embroidered with a dragon. And the emperor and I think the royal household were the only ones that were allowed to have that symbolism, because the kings of Korea were said to be descendant from the sea god, or somehow related to the dragon. And there also were like the number of talons on the dragon also symbolized your rank. So it's pretty complicated, but within the royal family, there were like, if you were the son of the king, you had one name. If you were the son of the king and his concubine, you had another title. It's really complicated. But princes also had dragons, if I'm not mistaken, but the number of talons were different. They didn't have as many talons. So that's all.
I mean, like, to be perfectly honest, Simona, you would be the authority on this subject because I have no clue.
Authority very loosely.
Yeah.
So like I said, if anyone knows, let me know. If I've said anything wrong, let me know as well. So what you find out is that Lord Shim, who's the head of one of these houses,
Lotus House,
has severed the red thread because he wants to protect the sea god. So he's one of the few houses that is actively trying to do that.
I do want to point out something that I really liked when I read the book, when I was reading when Mina is on her way to Lotus House to get her voice back, and there's a procession going on. It's a wedding procession, and it made me really happy because in the wedding procession, it was one of the women who had been brought from another village to be sacrificed to the sea god, and she had been really sad. She had lost her sister, and so since clearly she didn't marry the sea god, but she is marrying the god of death, and although he's the god of death, he loves her very dearly, and it made me so happy to know that she was marrying somebody that she really cared for, so that I just wanted to.
Which I also wonder, because obviously in Korea at the time, and also in many countries around the world, marriage was seen very differently than it is today.
Like the whole notion of marrying for love is a very recent tradition. It's nothing that really dates back to any further than probably within like the mid 20th century, because marriage was very much a contract. It was very much done for wealth and privilege, like, not, I want to say privilege, but prestige and protection.
Yeah, and the reason why I brought that up, because yes, Mina does observe that one of the former brides is in a wedding procession, and she is very happy that that bride has found happiness. And while I'm not saying that there were marriages that existed without love, obviously that would be ridiculous to say that. There were couples that, even if marriages were arranged, they grew to love one another, at least respect one another. And even among lower classes, there was still an idea of arranging, because essentially families wanted to ensure that their daughters were provided for.
Yeah.
So when they searched for those husbands, that was taken into consideration. They didn't just simply give their daughters to anyone. They wanted to make sure as much as possible that their daughters would be happy to one form or another. It didn't always work out, but that was essentially the idea.
I'm going to call shenanigans on that concept there, Simona.
Katie can call shenanigans, but I do believe that, yes, okay, fine. I'm sure there were fathers and mothers that were conniving and manipulative, and they didn't care about their daughter's happiness. But there were parents that did.
I don't think so.
So anyway, so she's happy to see that this bride has found love, even as with the death god. They obviously are very happy. The death god and Lord Shim don't see eye to eye. They don't really get along, but more about that later. So Mina is able to retrieve the magpie, which there is another house that is currently also trying to retrieve that magpie. But they're able to thwart those robbers.
Thieves!
Yes.
And I just want to say it's really ironic that then after regaining her soul and her ability to speak, the red string of fate then connects Mina and Shim
Exactly. And
together. Is it Shim or Shin?
I think it's Shim, Shim, and I have the book in front of me. But if you,
I thought
I
it was.
believe it's Shim.
We are so prepared for this podcast.
But that's fine. That's why you love us, and that's why you tune in to listen to us.
We're fallible human beings.
Yes, I'm going to say it's Shim. I can't find him right now, but that's what I have. We'll say Shim. If we're wrong, Axie Oh, we're sorry.
Yes.
So they thwart the people that are trying to steal the magpie, which Shim has kept in a birdcage. The birdcage falls. The magpie is released and bursts into bright light. And after it erupts into light, the red string of fate reappears, but this time it connects Mina to Lord Shim, and her voice also returns.
Yes, and he can't cut it.
Yeah, and it's impossible for him to cut the string, and Lord Shim is obviously taken aback because the red string of fate is supposed to connect soulmates, and Lord Shim is revealed does not have a soul.
Right.
So he cannot understand how they could possibly be connected with this red string. And over the course of the novel, Mina tries to figure this out. Lord Shim tries to figure this out. They're dealing, like I said before, with the warring factions. The houses are trying to take advantage of the current instability within the spirit realm to take control. The goddess of moon and memory has also involved herself in what is currently going on. And she has these like snake beings called Imogi, which they are so cool in Korean mythology. They're essentially gigantic worms that would love to be dragons, but they can't be dragons unless they achieve a certain goal, but they're very cool. Yeah, I just wanted to say that.
They sound terrifying.
They are pretty terrifying, but at the same time,
like they come. Well, they. I mean, I guess. Yeah, I guess, but they come to the Lotus House and they're very threatening.
They are, yes.
Danger. Danger, Will Robinson. Danger, danger.
Yeah, they are very threatening, but very cool at the same time. Because I'm thinking about this Korean drama where the villain is an Imogi, and he has a very sinister and creepy backstory. The drama is Tale of the Nine Tailed, which is on Netflix. It's really cool because the main character, the central villain of the story, is one of these mythological creatures. And his desire was to ascend to become a dragon. Didn't work. So, and one of the friends of Lord Shim is also an Imogi, but he's decided, I'm going to break away from my family's lifestyle. It's kind of like Michael in The Godfather. He essentially wants to
Yeah, but
break
Michael
away.
gets pulled into being a godfather anyway.
He does. And, yeah, so, and I think it's Namgi is the Imogi, and his brothers are the ones that crash the party.
Yeah.
And Namgi does kind of get pulled into the drama, but unlike Michael Corleone, he's able to break free again. Nothing happens to him. So they find out the goddess of moon and memory is very upset also with Lord Shim. She doesn't like the fact that Mina is there. And she is trying to prevent the sea god from waking up. And as you read the story, you start to realize what her motivations are. And reading it the second time, I had a different take on why she's doing what she does.
Right.
If we want to jump ahead a little bit to the story, and spoilers abound, so you've been warned. The ultimate reveal of the story is that Lord Shim and the current sea god switched places, so to speak. So the goddess of moon and memory, she knows she holds memories. So there's a tradition where Mina and her people would write their hopes and desires on these paper boats and then float them out into the sea with the idea that the gods would answer those prayers. What Mina discovers to her horror is that these boats have been released, but no prayers have been answered. And one day she requests that the goddess of moon and memory sort of meet with her, and she asks for the memory of the current sea god because she realizes something is definitely not right with him. She is able to access the memory, and what you learn is that the sea god was a human emperor, and he was fighting this war. He became critically injured, and the sea god, because the sea god was closely connected to the emperor, comes down, and what he does is he exchanges their souls in order for the emperor to live. And that explains also why Lord Shim has no soul, why the sea god has these dreams that plague him, but he can't really understand why he's having these dreams.
Right.
That also explains why he cannot fulfill his duties. Also why the red string of fate that supposedly connected Mina to the sea god disappeared and was easily broken because he wasn't the sea god. So that's the big reveal. So once they receive their memories, the true emperor is brought back to Earth. Shim ascends as the sea dragon, and of course there's a separation period because Mina cannot remain in the afterlife, so she has to go back home. But because she has been able to do this, the storms that have plagued her people are gone. The emperor has returned, and he's bringing peace and stability to the land. At first, I was trying to figure out how his advisor managed to convince people. By the way, a king who died over like 100 or so years ago is back. But if you're wondering why he's still young, it's because he was in the spirit realm.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
That's how that works.
That's so...
Time flows differently in the spirit realm.
So the emperor is restoring peace, and of course, he still has memories of Mina. And and this is such a K-drama moment because it's happened in K-dramas where like the emperor comes and it's like he's fallen in love with the peasant girl. So he comes to Mina and he says, I still remember you. I remember what you did for me in the spirit realm. Will you marry me?
Yeah. Confliction.
I know. Marry the emperor, stay poor, marry the emperor. I don't really know. Let's ask our viewers, what would you decide? Poor, marry the emperor?
Well, I mean, I think it would be a little hard if you had feelings for Shim.
But let's just say you would never be reunited with the love of your life because he's in the spirit realm, so you would essentially have to wait until you were dead.
Oh, well then, do I want to be poor or do I want to marry rich and power? And I would probably marry for rich and power.
What about you, Lou? But it wasn't an emperor, it was an empress.
I'm all about rich.
Okay.
Even if my loved one wasn't in the afterworld.
Wasn't?
Wasn't.
Oh,
see,
my
now.
Lord.
I'm a gold digger.
So Lou and Katie... Well, no, Katie, no. Katie would stay faithful to...
Yes.
Faithful.
Yes.
She's faithful. Lou was all about that money life. Me, I'm like, I'd have to really weigh the pros and cons. Because
Champagne and caviar.
But the thing is, eventually, when
All
you
the
die,
books
you
you
would
can
be
read.
reunited.
So you would wait 50 years alone and...
No. I would marry, and then once I died, then I would be reunited with the one I really liked.
Dude. You got the one you love, right?
Yeah.
You marry rich. Find a way to kill the person off. Bada bing, bada boom, you collect the money.
Oh my God.
It's like Heartbreakers with Jennifer Love Hewitt.
Oh my
That's
God.
what the whole movie was about.
We're not advocating this, by the way.
No, we're not.
FYI.
No.
But, the good news is that goodness and kindness is rewarded. Like Shim Chung in the original fairy tale, Mina's kindness, her dedication, her perseverance, and her basically refusal to give up is rewarded.
She's
both
actually a sea god, the bride of the sea god.
Exactly. Both on like a larger nation scale because the wars have stopped, the floods have stopped, and also on a more personal level.
Well, I was going to say Shim comes and gets her.
Yes, yeah. So they basically make an agreement that at a certain time, on a certain day, they were going to meet at the cliffside. And a few years pass where Mina goes to the cliffside. Is it a few years or a few months?
I don't know. I feel like the time span is not that specific.
I want to say maybe 1 or 2 years pass, and she's going there. Shim doesn't come.
Yeah, I mean, she's going to the cliffs because the emperor is there waiting for her.
Yeah.
She's going, and then suddenly she senses Shim.
I know, and it's such a beautiful moment.
It is a beautiful
They're
moment.
reunited.
But then it's like that decision, though, too. It's like, does she go a life of comfort, of wealth, of protection to the emperor, or does she follow her heart and be with Shim, and ultimately she follows her heart?
She follows her heart, but they come to an agreement, kind of like Persephone and Hades, only Persephone didn't have much of a choice, but Mina does have, basically where
Wait a minute.
before Katie jumps on me, the reason why I'm bringing that comparison is because Mina and Lord Shim come to an agreement where she wouldn't spend all of her time in the spirit realm because she still has her family.
Right.
So she says, I will spend some time with you, some time with my family, because I need to maintain that connection. The reason why I was kind of calling it a Persephone and Hades thing is because Persephone, for a certain amount of time of the year, had to be in Hades, and then for the remainder, she could be on Earth. Persephone didn't have much of a choice because she happened to eat the food of the underworld, and yeah, we know how that story goes.
I just want to say that popular culture likes to twist and turn Greek mythology, because Persephone was very much willing to be down in the underworld with Hades,
But
because
she sound a bit more romantic?
Because she loved Hades, because no one else
sounds
would.
more romantic to me.
And
Well,
she eats this. She eats the six, the six pomegranate seeds, and that's why we have 6 months of fall and winter.
And this is just a segue.
Thanks a lot, Persephone.
She was also the daughter of Demeter, so she's technically a goddess, not a. She's the goddess of spring.
See, Katie's getting very technical.
And not a human.
Yeah,
I'm not technical. I'm telling the truth about the Greek myth.
Anyway,
I hate winter.
The comparison stands. So anyway, so it ends very well. It has a really good ending. Although even the original folktale had a really good ending too, because Shim Chung gets married, she gets wealthy, her father's eyes. What did you say, Liv? You can't just mutter something and not say it. Come on.
He just repeated her name, Shim Chung.
Yes. And again, I apologize if I'm messing up the pronunciation of that name. I do apologize. But in the original folktale, she gets money, she gets wealth, but at the same time, her father's eyesight is restored.
Right. And she also returns to her village.
Yeah.
And then at the end, is it the sea god she marries, or is it actually an emperor? I think it's the emperor.
In the original folktale, she's returned to Earth because the sea god is so moved by her kindness and her piety. He returns her to Earth, and this emperor sees her and he marries her.
All right, yep, that's it.
Because she's also supposed to be very beautiful. Mm-hmm. So she gets married to the emperor. The emperor allows her to throw this feast in honor of every blind person, which is also Shim Chung's attempt to locate her father because they've been separated. Mm-hmm. So the father goes to that feast. She hears his voice, and they're immediately reunited, and his eyesight is immediately restored.
Yes.
In North Korea, the folktale is told differently, and the values of the folktale are also very different as well.
Well, I mean, it's North Korea, so.
Yeah. So I did. I'm sorry. So I did read about some of the changes, but I really don't recall what they were. I was debating whether to include that when we discussed this, but then I decided not to. But there is a difference. The outcome of the fairy tale is different, and the sort of morality attached to the folktale is different as well.
Yep.
When I read the original folktale, I didn't see it as being any less feminist because Shim Chung decides to sacrifice herself in the original folktale, unless I'm also mistaken about that. She makes that decision. Her goodness is rewarded.
Yeah, I mean, I saw that as well. I really didn't feel like she had been... I don't remember her being chosen by the village elders to be the bride of the sea god. That she very much was a willing participant. So she had autonomy in the original folktale.
Because the girl who fell beneath the sea is sort of billed as a feminist retelling. And one thing I just want to briefly say, there's this trend, BuzzFeed started in the 2000s where they had to feminize Disney fairy tales to make them better. And
why?
and I'm not saying that there aren't problematic elements to fairy tales, but when you realize what their intent was, what their original audience was, also the culture of the time.
Which were adults.
Exactly.
It was to teach adults lessons, not
Yeah.
children, because children were not meant to be entertained back in the day.
And also, it's this notion that you need to make things better, that in our modern day, we are somehow more intelligent, more aware, so we have to make things better and change things.
Or trendier.
Exactly. So
You don't think that people are. You don't think that people are more aware nowadays?
I do believe that there were certain cultural norms. I'm not excusing those cultural norms, but I like what one professor said. If you look at a lot of code, like law books, so the Code of Hammurabi, if you look at that, you would think, oh my God, these people were barbarians. But he made a distinction. Law is very different from
Right.
society.
Yes.
So I believe there also is this notion that the people of the past were these robots. They had no souls.
Right.
They had no sense of family. Like, love didn't come until like the 20th century. And that's not true. Yes, there were times when certain things occurred where we would say, okay, we sort of step back and we think that's not right. But it doesn't mean that people were devoid of humanity and
Right.
devoid of emotion.
Right.
Yeah.
I also want to point out too that when I was going to school in Scotland, I looked at the law codes of like ancient Ireland, and they had before the Catholic Church came in and forcibly converted all of the pagans in Ireland, they had multiple wives, but the head wife could choose the wife for the second wife for the husband. She could, I mean, she had a lot of power and autonomy in the household, and like the second wife didn't have that much power. So I mean, like, to say that the women in ancient Ireland or anywhere else didn't have power or autonomy of their own, I feel like it's very, I don't want to call it close-minded, but it's very nearsighted, in my opinion.
It is, and the reason why I brought that up is because this is billed, if you read the description, as a feminist retelling. And the reason why I sort of wanted to talk about this is because even the term feminist, what do you mean by it?
Yeah, because feminist has multiple different meanings. If you, the word feminist the terminology of feminist has changed from when it was initially thought as in the late 60s, early 70s with the women's movement, which I think in that time period, it had a much better meaning than it does now.
Exactly, and I'll bring another example of a fairy tale. So if you look at the classic fairy tale of Snow White, and I know there are other cultures that when I talk about the fairy tales, I'm mostly going to be talking about Western ones just because I know those a bit better. So when you look at Snow White, there are variations of Snow White.
Yes.
And Snow White in many respects would not be seen as a feminist character. Yes. In the fairy tale, she's essentially this young woman who, through the cruelty of her stepmother, is forced to flee her home. She is almost murdered countless times. Eventually, the queen succeeds in putting her into a deep sleep, and she goes into a glass box. So yes, she is not the most proactive of fairy tale characters. And there are certain versions of the story where questionable things do happen to her while she is sleeping. I'm just not going to say what they are. But
I thought that was the sleep. I think you're confusing that with the Sleeping Beauty.
No, there's also a Snow White story. So there's a
Stuff happens to her while she's asleep?
So there's one version by an Italian writer where the prince comes across Snow White.
We talking Disney.
No.
We're talking Disney.
No, we're talking Grimm Brothers. We're talking
the original fairy tales.
Like 18th century, 17th century original writing.
Well, that's not the one that people know, though.
No. Well, there's this Italian version where the prince comes across Snow White. She's very beautiful. He has sex with her while she is asleep. She gives birth to twins.
Like we said, the stories are meant for adults, not for children to begin with.
And it is when one of her infants is searching for her breast to suckle, he sucks on her finger, removes the thorn, and she awakens from her sleep. The prince finds her again, says, "Hey, I have 2 kids." And he takes her and she becomes the queen and she lives happily ever after. So, that's one version. And
Lou, again, we're talking the 18th and 17th century.
We're gonna
So
have
you're
looking
I
at
understand that. And you
adult-
don't see any problems with that, though.
I didn't
No,
say I
there are problems with this.
I
but
didn't say that I. And just so that I cover myself, no way am I advocating for someone to assault a person while they're unconscious. That's not why I'm bringing this up. And maybe like a better.
Okay,
Lou, quiet.
all right. You know what? Disney's Snow White.
Yes.
Disney's Snow White, I believe, is seen as not as a feminist character, a feminist fairy tale, because of how Snow White is portrayed as being.
Mm-hmm.
Also, we have to think about the fact that Snow White was made in 1937. So you're looking at a time period where it was still very much a woman's place to be married, to have children, to not. I don't want to say not be proactive, because there were women in the 30s who were very much proactive in their own lives and going against the norm. But pop culturally speaking, it was always portrayed that a woman's place was in hearth and home.
And I think, and the reason why, and Katie did a much better job. The reason why I was bringing that up was because there's this notion where if a woman chooses a traditional lifestyle, meaning a woman, even if she's highly educated, decides I'm going to enter the home, it is seen as almost being a betrayal. And I'll talk from personal experience with my mom. So I was talking with some classmates, said, "Oh, my mom was a housewife for many years, and eventually she entered the workforce when I probably was in 3rd grade." And the woman said, "Oh, well, your mother probably didn't know any better."
That's a huge assumption right there.
Also, can I say something?
Sure.
Because this is kind of touching a nerve. That person that said that about your mom probably thinks they're a feminist, but that's like the opposite of feminism.
Right, and I think
We're getting Lou engaged now. This was my whole point.
Feminism is about empowering women to make their own decisions.
Exactly.
Yeah. But see, this is why I'm saying that feminism now is far removed from what the terminology was in the late 60s, early 70s, because it's all about a woman's choice.
So, and my point in bringing this up is because this is, as I've said before, and I kind of feel like I'm being repetitive, that the way this story is being sold, that it's more feminist than the original. And my question that I pose is, what does it mean to be feminist? So when you see a lot of the retellings of fairy tales, Snow White, for example, the one with Kirsten Stewart, she is wielding a sword, so that makes her this badass woman. That is feminist.
Yeah.
Granted, if you can do that, that's awesome. But what about the woman, think of women who were pioneers, or women during the Great Depression who had to handle family. I'm sure many of them were working at the time as well.
Yeah.
Are they not badass women?
Yes.
So how are we defining what is feminist my ultimate point.
Right. And I mean, just going back to Disney's Snow White, it's not that, again, the time period in which it was made.
Yes.
But also, too, it's like she made the decision to run away when the huntsman told her to run.
Yes.
She could have easily have said, "Oh no, that's not what you're wrong," or whatever.
And she helps the dwarves.
She does help the dwarves.
When you think about they're living in squalor, she goes into their house.
Again.
And she motivates them.
Well, she cleans for them, but...
Still, but when you think about it, these were men that are living on their own. They're living in squalor. Some of them don't seem too happy. There's isn't one named Sad or Cry, or they're not doing too well.
It's Doc, Happy, Bashful, Sleepy, Sneezy, Angry, and Dopey.
Okay, so there's no Sad.
No.
But the point is that these men are in need of motivation. And through that wonderful song, Whistle While You Work, which promotes industriousness. She gets them to work. She gets them to clean up themselves and get their act together.
Well, I mean, she does clean the cottage on her own with the help of woodland creatures. But
anyway, my point
I mean,
still stands.
It's like, I guess, like, feminism when it was initially what you call it, termed, was like, you know, empowerment of women being able to make their own decisions, whether they wanted to be in the household or in the workforce, regardless. You know, she still has Snow White still has autonomy. She makes the decision to run away. She makes the decision to tidy up the cottage. She makes the decision, you know, to eat the apple, even though the evil queen is now a peddler.
She's also a victim of abuse.
She is.
When you think about Snow White, and I promise I'll get off this tangent, but this is what kind of bothers me about this, is even think about another recent adaptation of Aladdin. And in the live action adaptation, Jasmine has a song called Speechless, where she says, "I will no longer be speechless." Now, for those of you, if you are familiar with the original Disney animated film, which came out in the 90s,
I am.
Jasmine is far from being a speechless, unopinionated character. She has a lot of agency.
Yeah.
She voices when she is displeased with something.
Yeah,
so that's what bothered me.
Right,
Jasmine's not voiceless.
No, especially in the scene where Jafar and Aladdin, who's then Ali, and the Sultan are arguing over what, you know, Aladdin makes this backhand, I don't want to even say it backhanded, but like this snide comment that he's going to be, you know, the one to sweep the princess off your feet, kind of a thing, without even knowing who she is. And she says, you know, how dare you, all of you standing around discussing my future? I am not a prize to be won. That is not somebody who is voiceless, you know. So
Lou, you've seen Aladdin, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite Disney movies.
Would you say, like, in your opinion, being honest, like, that Jasmine is a character that lacks agency?
No.
Yeah. So that goes back to my point with all these so-called quote-unquote feminist retellings where we have to make things better. It's going back to what is your notion of feminist? Mm-hmm. And I think the modern track is basically that unless a woman is like Mulan, even the live-action adaptation, twirling in the sky, wielding a sword, defeating men like it's nobody's business, then she's not feminist enough. So that's my point. I'm sorry I'm going on a rant, but this bothers me.
I mean, it bothers. Well, you're not the only one that this is bothered by. It bothers me as well because, I mean, Belle has agency.
Yeah.
She, you know, chooses to go after her father and, you know, trades places with him. Ariel has agency. I'm trying to think of who else. Cinderella.
Yeah.
Has agency.
Because these are the typical fairy tales that are attacked often enough when it comes to whether it's the Disney version or the original. Even with original, there are so many variations.
Yeah.
But the original fairy tales, that's the common sort of attacking points where, like, Belle is a victim of Stockholm syndrome.
No.
Cinderella, she just is everyone's punching bag and she does absolutely nothing and then gets rewarded. So basically the idea is that it convinces women to be passive, which Cinderella is far from passive. And again, when you realize her circumstances, she is doing everything that she can to survive.
Right, and the abuse that she endures constantly from her stepmother and her stepsisters, it's not, she's far from being somebody's punching bag and that she doesn't do anything. It's hard to think that you can do anything more when you're under those type of conditions.
And when you also think about victims of abuse in general, that's what everyone says, you know, get your act together, why don't you just leave? So it's also a slap in the face to people who are victims of domestic violence.
Right.
So in closing, going back to the original story,
I just want to say I did like the story. It was very different from what I would initially read. It is a good story.
It is, yeah.
It's just that it was marketed as being a new feminist.
with the a lot of the marketing that I did see, it was being marketed as like a feminist retelling. Axie Oh returns agency to the sea god's bride, sort of a deal. And it is a good book. I don't want to be mistaken that I did enjoy it. It's a really good book, and I would highly read it. It is a good book.
Yeah, it is.
But that's what sort of bothered me. This notion of that stories now are restoring agency to it. And I'm not saying that there aren't women who do not have it. Yes, of course. There are women for various circumstances are robbed of their agency.
Yes.
But when you narrow the definition of what is feminist and what is acceptable for a woman to be, that's what bothers me, because you are basically mitigating the work that's involved in raising a home, in providing a home, raising your children.
Right.
And there are women that willingly choose it and are happy in that sphere.
Right.
And that's nothing to deride or laugh at. And they are just as feminist as the woman or the women that we have fighting on the front lines, the women who are overseas serving.
Right.
They're no different.
Right.
That was my point.
Right. And I just want to make the other side of that point, though, too, is that a lot of women aren't able to live that lifestyle, though, either. Like my mom, who's a single mom, who had to work in order to provide for me. So, I mean, it also comes down to circumstance as well, I feel. So, I mean, it can't really be one way or the other, because each circumstance is very much different.
But the point is, whatever your circumstances are, hopefully, to one degree or another, you have some choice. You do have some agency. And yeah, if you want to come to the library, please check it out. It is also available through Hoopla, which is one of our streaming services. So feel free to come in, ask us about this book. We hope that you enjoyed this episode, and we will see you again next time when we will be talking about banned books or challenged books. So we look forward to seeing you then.
Bye.
Bye.